right, we are live. Hello and good afternoon, good morning, or even good evening, everyone, depending on from where you have joined us today. Welcome to the 43rd episode of the IET India Digital Conversations. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you're all doing well and keeping safe. I'm Suman Bhaumik, your host for this series, and I lead the events development for the IET in India. But before we begin our session, for those of you who don't know much about the IET, please allow me to take a couple of minutes and tell you a little bit about us and our session today. The Institution of Engineering and Technology, also known as the IET, is a 150 years old global organization inspiring, informing, and influencing the engineering community to engineer a better world. As a diverse home across engineering and technology, we share knowledge that helps make better sense of the world to solve the challenges that matter. At IET India, we want to grow actionable knowledge, want to solve India-centric engineering issues, and want to enhance people's lives using technology and thought leadership to drive innovation. Now, coming to our topic for the digital conversation today, which is artificial intelligence in healthcare. We all know by now that AI, or artificial intelligence as we know it, has the ability to improve care outcomes, reduce costs, improve quality of care while improving patient and provider experience. While the initial attempts with AI have been partially successful and a lot of this has been accelerated due to this pandemic, we still have a long way to go to fulfill the potential of AI to make it broad-based and integrated with our healthcare system. Fortunately for all of us, we have the best set of experts today who can throw some light on this topic and steer us through the known facts to help us understand the facts which we don't know. And when we talk about technologies such as AI and core sectors such as healthcare for a country of over 1.3 billion people like ours, this can really create a healthcare system which will be there to cater the needs of everyone, right from urban to rural and remote areas. So speaking about the experts, let's now introduce them and start this exciting session. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Sujoykar, who is the Chief Medical Information Officer and the Vice President of Apollo Hospitals, previously Medical Director of Apollo Gleneagles Hospitals, Kolkata. He is a clinical microbiologist by training and an alumni of MIT Sloan School of Management. He is an adjunct faculty for healthcare analytics and management at IIM Calcutta and IIT Kharagpur. His current and ongoing research interests are in the development of adoption of artificial intelligence in healthcare and digital health platforms. Our next speaker is Heather Fraser, who joins us all the way from United Kingdom. Heather is the global head, or the global lead rather, for life sciences and healthcare in the IBM Institute for Business Value, a business think tank. She helps in developing thought leadership on business issues that span the healthcare ecosystem, including the future of industries, ecosystems, innovation, digital, cognitive, artificial intelligence, blockchain, social business, and aging. He's leading the development of thought leadership about the global healthcare ecosystem and life sciences sector with 30 years of experience in the healthcare and life sciences industry, holding positions in pharma, thought leadership, consultancy, and community pharmacy. Our third speaker is Satish Kumar, who is the Senior Director, Global Software Leader at Philips HealthTech. He is responsible for leading a 350 plus member global software development team spanning across India, Netherlands, and China, and encompassing the complete spectrum of MRI, CT, and DXR businesses. Being the leader of leaders, he has the responsibility of 7 different platforms or teams, including artificial intelligence and analytics, DevOps, core services, serviceability, user workflow, integration and automation, product ownership, and system engineering teams. Coming to our fourth speaker, Mr. Suresh Kumar Rajashekar, the Vice President Technology at Optum, and he leads the product engineering group of Optum based out of Bangalore, India. Suresh has passion for creating breakthrough solutions and building strong engineering talent. With his team, he actively leverages various technical stacks, including Azure Cloud and emerging technologies like AI, ML, and blockchain to provide innovative and intelligent products to customers. Their products and solutions enable better services by the provider, payer, and governments, apart from helping in reducing the healthcare cost. And finally, our moderator for this session, a well-known face in the healthcare fraternity in India and one of the top 30 healthcare influencers in India, Dr. Vikram Venkateswaran. Dr. Vikram is also part of our Future Tech Panel's Healthcare Advisory Group. He's the founder and editor of Healthcare India, a think tank that is passionate about building futuristic models for healthcare in India with a view to increasing access, quality, and outcomes. He serves on various industry committees on healthcare and has published papers on a wide range of topics like patient experience, blockchain, and public health. He has also authored his debut book called Own Your Health, where he talks about leveraging technology to manage health at an individual level. Thank you, speakers, for joining us today. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the members of our healthcare working group of the IET Future Tech panel, led by Mr. Ravi Ramaswamy, Ajit Ashok, Vikram, and others. And I want to thank them for helping us curate this wonderful session and driving this session for us today. Now, I would gladly request Dr. Vikram to take over and start the discussion. I'll be here if you need me, Dr. Vikram. Thank you.
Thank you, Suman, for the wonderful introduction, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone on this wonderful session. Now, artificial intelligence is a very interesting topic, not only for healthcare, but probably there is not a single industry which today does not feel that AI has some role to play. If you look at areas like online e-commerce as well as media and technology, today AI is more prevalent, moving from what we call as narrow angle AI or narrow use AI to more wider implications. Today, if you are able to track your Amazon deliveries or are able to choose your favorite show based on your previous watching patterns, you can thank AI for that. But one of the most fascinating experiences is the use of AI in actual care or healthcare. While a lot of you might feel that there is no artificial intelligence in healthcare, you'll be surprised by how AI has impacted time to diagnosis, patient experience, clinical trials, health insurance, among others. So to do so, what I find very fascinating about our panel today is we probably for the first time on a panel of this size have covered the four basic ingredients and the subsectors within healthcare. You have the hospitals, you have insurance, you have med devices and med tech, and then you have pharma. So with that in mind, today our discussion is going to move away from theoretical motherhood discussions on artificial intelligence in healthcare, but look at more practical aspects. My objective today is to leave you with ideas that work and steps that you need to take. And these ideas and steps are going to come from these experts on the call who have, agreed to spend valuable time with us today to help share the knowledge and the insights and experiences they have gained over the years. So with that, I want to kick off this session. And, I believe that the cornerstone of the healthcare system in India and globally is still the hospital. So my first guest on the hot seat is Dr. Sujoykar. And Dr. Kar, I really thank you and the work that Apollo has been doing over the years. You are our bellwether. You have set standards for healthcare in India. You go anywhere abroad, the hospital, one of the hospitals they know is Apollo because of the number of patients you have treated and the complex surgeries you've done. But one of the fascinating stories that is coming out of the artificial intelligence world is the use of personal assistants or digital health assistants. And I know that you've done some pioneering work with Google as well. So my question is more specific to you. One of the advantages of AI, the way I see it in India, is access to care, where I can make a quick diagnosis and decide whether I need to ship a person to the hospital, and more so in a remote area, like a town or a village which is far away from a district hospital. So how far away are we from a realistic personal digital AI assistant in healthcare in India?
Thank you very much, Dr. Vikram, for the introduction and this invitation to actually come over on this very esteemed panel and give my views, the views of the organization, and also the views of overall use of AI in healthcare setting. I think we are just about beginning to understand the power of data in healthcare globally. And we are also understanding how do we go about in making it a meaningful use to derive the value out of it. And coming to value, in my previous work that I used to do, I used to do more of quality and patient safety, and being involved with an organization called Institute of Healthcare Improvement, where they called about triple aim. And you touched about the accessibility, but then it's also about accessibility, quality, and also about affordability in terms of the value that people get. And it's all about, how you divide the quality by the cost to actually derive the value of whatever you are trying to get into in healthcare. In that context, if you bring AI comes with what we call as inspired technology solution for healthcare, which actually improves your tech capability. And I'm not giving this word. I work very closely with Microsoft. So this is a word that has come from Satya Nadella. And tech capability is about how you look into your technology plus how you are able to take it to the last mile. We would have to see how that is being accomplished by AI in healthcare context. But in doing so, I would always say to make AI scalable from, in a healthcare setting and integrate it with a clinician's workflow, there is something still that we need to do or follow certain steps to get there. The first is the ethical consideration. And I bring in ethics at the very beginning of this conversation by making that, we have to go back, whatever we do in healthcare, with the first thing that comes from Hippocrates' oath, do no harm. Safety and non-maleficence is very, very important. And then you have a lot of things which comes from the AI perspective in terms of, say, inclusiveness, fairness, taking out bias, making things accurate and efficacious, all of these comes in. The next is you have to bring in a solution cannot be an engineering solution or a doctor's solution. You cannot build things in silo. You have to bring in systems thinking in order to understand the problem before even you start to put in the solution. And that is where you will have to also think about how do you go and integrate into a physician's workflow. And I'm sure some of my friends from Philips and IBM will give you the examples about how they do that. The third thing that I wanted to talk about is the perspective of suitability, whether it works, whether it doesn't work in a clinical setting. And lastly, the fourth point is about the explainability part to make it scalable. That what you develop in AI has to be an explainable. Your engineer should be able to, or data scientist should be able to explain this to the doctor, who in turn has to go and explain it to the patient. If that explainability journey does not take place, if there is no pipeline of explainability in your AI module, it will not work. I'll stop with these words. I'm sorry, in a synonym, I call this as EASE, which is ethics, adoption, suitability, and explainability. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Kar. But one small counter question then. How far away are we?
I think it's a journey that has well begun. I must put it that way. But, it is so intricately now going to be a part of health systems that we would have to really understand or define where do we want to reach with this. And at the moment, it looks like a long journey and infinite possibilities.
Excellent. So we're nowhere close to it. That's what I understand from you. And, given the standards that you have to maintain while giving diagnosis, so anybody who is looking at a FAQ chatbot as the next personal diagnostic AI is here to understand that it's a big mile off. because we have a lot of startups that come up with these ideas, but it takes time. So excellent response, and I think those 4 factors are to be kept in mind, and we'll come back to ethics in a while. It's a very fascinating topic, especially in the context of AI. But let me quickly move over to Heather. Heather, one of the biggest advantages of COVID has been that vaccine development has really been remarkably fast, and a lot of credit for that, especially in the R&D areas, is going to the work that is pioneering work that's already done in analytics and AI. But can we really look at AI and how has it impacted drug discovery and clinical trials in particular? So can that process, has it been there any impact of artificial intelligence on this process? Or are we, like Dr. Carr said, miles away even in that aspect?
Well, I think, Vikram, as a pharmacist working in clinical trials back in the 1990s, we were talking then about reducing the time to market of drugs. At that time it was between 12 and 20 years. And then going into my first consulting job, my first project, in fact, was a time to market project. And the goal was to get drugs to market within 6 years. And fast forward to 2020. And I think COVID has been a catalyst to get, as you say, the vaccines and also to repurpose some of the drugs that are out there at the moment. So I think COVID, doctors and scientists and organisations were working on, first of all, triaging the COVID symptoms, then looking at decoding and looking at how they defeated the COVID-19 virus, then finding a vaccine to protect it, as well as drugs to treat the systems. So I think, you were just talking about chatbots there, so just one comment on that. One of the things we did very early on at IBM was we worked on a virtual agent, a virtual assistant. But that was more about triaging people who had the COVID system. So in the UK, for example, our NHS 111 system was people were having to wait 3 hours plus to get through to talk to somebody. And, quite often it was the fear of COVID as opposed to actually the symptoms of it. So very quickly across Europe and then going into the States, the virtual agents helped to actually, to bolster reliability and also resilience in our healthcare services. Now, if we think about the actual R&D process, one of the things that IBM Research did was to help researchers looking for a COVID-19 vaccine to access both structured and unstructured data at speed. And so they had a corpus of thousands of papers related to the SARS drugs in an open research data set. And basically they also licensed databases from drug banks, clinicaltrials.gov and GenBank. And what we did there was to use advanced AI to allow users to make specific queries on those old papers, but also recent articles as they were coming through. And so they were found to be critical to the researchers for gathering data on COVID-19 to help them to help them with their research. And that included things like embedded text, tables and figures. So that was a very practical example from COVID. We also give you another few examples across other areas. So we worked on a disease called ALS, which is the Lou Gehrig's disease. Some of you may remember there was a lot of people a few years ago that were taking the ice bucket challenge and throwing ice over themselves. So that was for this disease. And one of the things we did with the team working on this was to help analyse patterns across previous clinical trials. And then combining those with real-world data. So basically, the AI system was able to analyse more than 70,000 papers in a matter of weeks. And the researchers calculated how long that would have taken them if they were to do that without the system. And it would have taken, if they were reading 5 papers a day, that would have taken them 38 years to achieve the same results. So it allowed them to, ingest that data and to improve the clinical trial matching and speed up clinical results. And also it was helping them to improve the safety efficacy of their trials and decrease the costs. Another example was some work that we did with Pfizer on AI across the drug discovery process. And again, it was looking at that mass of disparate data from both public and proprietary data. And again, the main output of that study was that they were able to streamline but also to accelerate the drug discovery process. And so that was done by creating platforms that brought together that relevant data and provided the context for those insights. And it allowed them both to look at drug targets, but also to look at possible combination therapies as well. And that was for cancer patients.
Excellent, Heather. I think those are some very, very good points. But yeah. I just want you to hold on to that thought because I have a associated question to Suresh. Because a lot of what you're saying is training the AI system to recognize those 70,000 papers and do it in weeks to look for symptoms of ALS or the molecules that will work better with ALS in weeks or days versus months or years that will take. But to Suresh, if I lead on to this from what we have learned in pharma to the work you're doing in devices and other areas, would it be nice to say that the data that you need to train the system is very, very critical? I think that is the most important area. So how do you create the training and the test data? And what are the, what can we learn from there? Because anybody who's built an AI system knows that the learning part has to come from this data set that you've created.
Absolutely. So there are some fundamental challenges, in the data, especially with the proliferation of AI, ML, in the radar for the last decade. Instead of people being more proactive in sharing, it actually became a highly protected commodity. And added to that, if you look at 2018 Deloitte report, only 48% of the medical devices that were coming out at that point in time actually had connectivity, right? So basically, you are actually creating islands of data, which is actually stuck to the device. Leave aside, the new products that are coming out, there are enough products in the install base, which is not going to change overnight, right? Because these products are highly reliable and they are going to continue to stay. And what do you do with the data that is stuck there as well, right? So definitely, how do I get the data out of the island is one big challenge that we have. And other one is, of course, around the quality of the data. Heather touched upon it. Even if data is available, many a times if I have to run over the data for my training sets, there needs to be at least some amount of common parlance to the data, some amount of sense to the data for learning to be really meaningful, right? So there is definitely no, although there are standards which are getting pushed thanks to various government initiatives, but still I think we have a long way to go, right? So that is the other challenge. Even when we have data, do we have the interoperability well taken care where we are able to use them nicely? We have a challenge, right? So data quality is a challenge. And the third important piece, which actually caused many to not share data, is also the trust around data privacy and security issues, right? So overall, if you look at, these are the three major challenges that actually were kind of holding on the availability of data. Data acquisition challenge is getting solved through various IoT initiatives. We do see now most devices, companies themselves are coming out with IoT devices to liberate the data. The same is happening with even third-party entrepreneurs who are also doing the same. Even on the data quality side, there are startups which are helping how to make the smarter annotation and things like that. But still, if you look at the data privacy, is a challenge for people not sharing data freely, right? Either talked about various conglomeration or various pharma companies coming together to share data. It has started happening now, thanks to some of the adaptation of some of the modern techniques. For example, like federated learning, right? A simple example of federated learning is how the Google Gboard works, or what you call as the swipe typing or gesture typing, right? So it's a very nice example that in 2016 Google went on to this and it got published widely, and the same technology actually can be used in the healthcare space also because of the various advantage it offers. You need not actually need to know how the data looks like and all that. You can, but all you can do is orchestrate the model, take the model to the data wherever it is, and you can actually now solve the problem of not having enough data to train. So what does it mean to a pharma company? It means that 10 different pharma companies can actually come together to share the data without violating any of their IP, where they can say that this is the element I am willing to share, and each of the element which is probably missing with the other person can be leveraged for developing a cross model which can be used by all of them together, versus each individual pharma company is trying to go behind a 10-year research to collect such amount of data. So that's the kind of possibility is on the table nowadays, Dr. Vikram. So I think things are opening up. There is still a lot more research has to be done, and of course, federated learning also takes care of the other issue which you talked about, which is the bias in the data. Bias actually happens because of scarcity of data. Since there is a lot of scarcity of data, you tend to utilize the data that you have got from a particular region and tend to develop the model on that. Whereas that model can basically be completely biased because it has only used a certain race or a certain complexion of the people's skin, or a certain geography based on the availability of the data, right? With federated learning, you can actually get rid of bias. You can actually get a little bit more better on many front as well. So I do see a lot of promise in this. It's very nascent in the healthcare adoption, but if more and more people come onto this bandwagon, I think we can make a difference together.
So Suresh, just hold your thought on the bias, because that's a question that's coming to everybody. Because ethical use of AI is probably a very hot topic ever since the EU published their guidelines on it. But you brought up a very interesting point that a lot of the content and the data is stuck in the devices, and this is from obviously you came from the devices background, and Satish here is on the hot seat now, because I think medical devices is one part of healthcare that was adopting technology way before anybody even had thought of it, right? So, two-part question to you, Satish. You see a lot of evolution in devices where you see a lot of big irons, but you also see software as a device. And you were the early adopters. So how do you maintain your edge, especially in solving problems like what Suresh has been talking about, like getting that data out of the device and device not being connected? So what are your thoughts around keeping that edge and going forward, including leveraging of AI in the device sector?
Yeah, I actually agree with what Suresh mentioned. The challenge of getting the data out of the device to a place where we can actually use it for training, right? That is, different vendors having different standards and different ways of doing things is one of the biggest challenges. While I also say that the devices has been an early adopters, but I would also mention that it's not accelerating that fast as probably what we would ideally want it to be. When you say, hey, the software as a device or a software as a medical device, right? The primary intention of serving a medical purpose, and that too not being part of any hardware device. In conjunction with a software in a medical device, right? You will see a lot of AI and machine learning algorithms and trainings. Um, Once done, goes into the second category of software in a medical device, and that is where more work has happened so far. And more work is going to happen and will, because it's evolving and there is a lot of demand for software as a medical device where things are not part of the actual hardware. It's more going into the cloud. And because one, you need that scale to do not just the training for those models, but also to deploy that kind of a compute that is needed while the algorithms are running to predict whatever it is used for, right? So what do we, if you look at the devices, a lot of, a major part of what a device, software as a medical device is going towards is primarily around the diagnosing a disease and treating, mitigating those diseases, and also connecting the data streams from a different diagnostic or a therapeutic device. It's one of this. And then the second important is around the criticality, for example, to inform how the treatment is going, how the provided, the follow-up of the treatments, how is the overall progress of the treatment is happening. This is another area where AI is playing or will play a bigger role. But if you look at, let me be specific with certain examples. When we are having a huge amount of data, let's say from an MRI scanner or a CT scanners, specific to that scanner, the amount of work that it can do, the AI can do, is going to be very minimal. But having those image data streams from longitudinal data, right, the diverse modalities like MR, X-ray, CT, and the genomic data, when that comes into picture to detect and diagnose physiological conditions, right, this is going to be the game-changing part, the clinical decision support. Not necessarily, I think, the debate around is AI going to replace a radiologist versus AI going to assist the radiologist. Dr. Karan, we had this small discussion a couple of days back, 2 days back, around if somebody says AI is going to replace, we'll obviously jump out of the seat, right? AI can go to a level of assisting the radiologist to make some decisions in an intelligent way, and that's going to be the niche area of how these software as a medical device will be used as a competitive edge for any of these vendors who's creating solutions towards AI. Software as a medical device. Then one more I would say is the challenge related to having this data management pipeline. How do we get this data that Suresh just mentioned, and having the environment to train those algorithms and bringing in the inferencing, the interpretation of those results is the second biggest area where you will see AI will play a bigger role. All of these, the innovations around these from medtech industries in the past decade has been improved, not fast enough, obviously because of the regulatory challenges, and second is accessibility for the data. these two challenges are stopping or in fact slowing down the innovations around the software as a medical device. When we open up these two, a lot more innovations you will see from the medtech industries, especially on the device areas.
Excellent, Satish. I think that's a great point. You've been held back not only by regulations but also, what is the acceptable standards and the time taken to some of those. But let me switch back to one more interesting component which always has an impact on the artificial intelligence debate. So those of us who've been at least visiting hospitals, have worked closely with clinical teams, know that the doctor leading the team or the head of department is the rock star, is the ultimate rock star. He takes all the calls. And this is a particular problem in India where most of our decision making in clinical, among the clinicians is experience driven. It's not protocol driven. It depends on, who's the HOD, which medical unit is this medicine 1 or medicine 2, and depending on who's leading it, everybody in that unit follows certain protocol. Also, there is obviously a shortage of people who really understand how AI can be implemented. We have technologists who understand AI, and we have clinicians who understand healthcare, but we obviously lack a set of people like Dr. Kar who probably understand both and who can talk both the languages, right, as a clinician, as an artificial intelligence expert. So Dr. Kar, question to you, from a hospital's perspective, from a healthcare perspective, what is going to hold you back more? Is it that we are still not very protocol driven? We are more, experience driven? Or is the fact that we don't have enough people, we don't have the right talent to kind of develop the artificial intelligence ecosystem?
We are somewhere in mix of all of this. There is no easy answer to this, saying whom you are going to blame or shoot first. I want to give you an example here. I want to give you what AI is doing today, or in the research part, some of the work that we have been doing as well. Imagine a patient who comes and gets, or an individual, patient would not be the right word, an individual who comes and gets a mammogram done, right? And today we have systems, and the one that we have worked very closely with my alma mater at MIT, where you take the mammogram and you are able to predict if somebody is going to have a breast disease or a malignant breast disease in next 4 years, 5 years time. Incidentally, let's say that the person has the chances of getting there, and then you bring the person, after being screened through that mammogram service, to consultant. What would he do? He would then advise for some FNSC or some biopsy to go ahead with, further tests, and look at it and from that. But then this is where you begin to now get clinical features, you will get images, you may get blood markers, you get even genomic data, right? All of these now in front of you as a clinician to process and identify what you are going to do next. The protocol that you would get at the point, very, very good institutions across the world, whether it is the NCCN guidelines or whether it is the guidelines that comes from Sloan Memorial Kettering or other institutions, MD Anderson, or even the European institutions, are in many ways very congruent. There are subtle differences here and there, could be also in the disagreement of the part, but in many ways these are protocol driven. And I have chosen a particular area where it is actually protocol driven wherever you go in the world at the moment. But what AI can do on this? AI can now look at the volume of data that has to be processed. And Satish was referring to this, that now we have systems which comes out of, in fact, in many ways from Philips or others, where you have the entire radiogenomics in front of the doctor to understand where the tumor lies, what is the histopathologic type, what is the genetic variation, what are the blood markers say, and then decide on the treatment. And now on the top of it, you have treatment guidelines, that you can develop longitudinally to see that if I have a choice of a surgery and chemotherapy versus surgery and chemotherapy and radiotherapy, or none of them, right? What is that is going to happen over 5 years, 10 years down the line using causality and counterfactuals, Bayesian networks and others, and deep learning on bringing on them. And we've been doing this. We did this for sepsis with a couple of guys from Stanford, and now we are now looking at it in other areas as well. What it does is at the point of decision making, it helps the clinician to say where to go, what to do, what next. And that is possibly the structure to build the CDSS and where you would see the maximum effect. One more thing that I want to bring into perspective. When we see standalone diagnostic tools that have been created, and there are various wonderful tools that have been created, including one which I was associated with Google, where they were looking at the retinal images and preparing for diabetic retinopathy. They had wonderful results. They had best of the data, which Suresh was talking about, but probably did not require any imputation and all of that. They built a wonderful system with a very high AUC precision recall and all of that. When they rolled this out on the ground, they found that it was not integrating into the workflow. And it's there in MIT Technology Review. You can go and look for it, that the Google AI algorithm for retinopathy actually did not work for the ground. Because you have to see how does that go and help the nurse who is doing those images, or the technician who is going to do these images, or even from the last mile point of view, are they able to access internet appropriately at the last mile to actually get the results in that way, which will help them to use an AI tool appropriately? Because these are cloud-based solutions. We have to figure all of these points appropriately to address, again coming back to the whole aspect of suitability and adoption, what works, what doesn't work.
Dr. Kar, that was brilliant. I think what you're saying is the operation was successful, but the patient died in this case. And that's a common joke in the medical fraternity, where every protocol was followed and everything was done, everything was brilliant, but can't use it. Which brings me to a very important point. And Heather, I want to put this question to you. What Dr. Kar is talking about is, obviously, he's talking about how it integrates into the protocols and processes, etc. But there needs to be an AI mindset. And I go back to the paper we worked on, all those years ago when we talked about FDA and its use of social media, and they had guidelines for social media those days that FDA had come out after almost the entire world had moved on to social media. FDA finally got on with it. But in your experience and what you're seeing around you, do we have that AI mindset, especially among the regulators? And Satish touched about regulations and standards some time ago. Dr. Kar talked about how it's not integrating, and Suresh talked about it. Almost everybody's talking about it. But do you see that mindset coming in specifically, for areas, especially in the pharmaceutical industries? And obviously, as a systemic thing, does it impact the entire healthcare industry?
Yes, so I think, the way I've looked at the healthcare system when I compare it, or healthcare and life sciences industries, when I've compared it with other industries that we research, and I'm afraid, we are still laggards when it comes to technology adoption. And I think, the way I've seen it is the technologies that have been adopted quickly and successfully have been about improving the existing pathways and the existing service delivery models. So that can be done. It's when you try to reimagine healthcare and to look at transformation enabled by digital capabilities. that we come up against problems. And I think, you know, there's three words, or probably two words that I always think of as barriers to whether it's the adoption of technology or whether it is, you know, that mindset. First of all, it's collaboration across that ecosystem, and I think we have still got a long way to go with that. And you know, I guess the second word that comes in with that is the trust. You know, having worked in the pharmaceutical industry and on the healthcare side, there is still that lack of trust between big pharma and healthcare in general. But if I think about the technologies that are transforming at the moment, that are being adopted, we're actually seeing hybrid cloud, security, and AI and analytics being considered as foundational technology now. For organizations that are looking at transforming. And, you know, looking at the data that came out from that, yes, hybrid, I could understand. Yes, I could understand security, cybersecurity and analytics, but I really didn't expect to see AI in that bucket as well. So, you know, that mindset is shifting. I think the other thing that we saw during the pandemic, or have been seeing during the pandemic, you know, we asked companies and organisations, you know, what technology were they adopting to look at across their supply chain, across their processes. And before the pandemic, the top technologies were mobile. They were looking at the Internet of Things, and also looking at global process re-engineering and automating that. And through the technology, through the pandemic, that moved to mobile being at the top. AI being number 2 and cloud being number 3. And, you know, what we heard from just under half of the respondents were that they were intending to make an investment in R&D for AI over the next 2 to 3 years. And they saw the benefits of it about, first of all, most of them saw capturing value from customer care as the number one benefit. And that was followed by respondents saying it would help them from an R&D perspective. Almost 3/4 expected it to have a positive impact on their performance across R&D. But they cited as barriers to actually implementing AI as executive support across the organisation and resistance to change in that area, and trust being one of the areas, one of the reasons for resistance to change, and also data governance. But I think, just to finish with an example of an organisation where they're looking, or a group of organisations, an ecosystem, if you will, where they're looking at science and data-led innovation and collaboration. And that's an announcement that was made earlier on this year by Cleveland Clinic in the US, which is a non-profit academic medical centre. And they were looking at how they could accelerate discovery using hybrid cloud AI and quantum computing. And there's not very many organisations that are looking ahead with quantum computing. So they're looking at partnering. So they are partnering with a number of organisations, including IBM. And they're going to establish a discovery accelerator using those technologies to increase the pace of discovery and healthcare sciences. It's not going to be a quick win. It's across a 10-year period, but they're really from I guess from a discovery and from a clinical trials, an R&D perspective, they're really looking at analysing that mass of data and using it to enhance research into genomics and also chemical and drug discovery. And so, I think in conclusion, they're seeing this as helping to find new approaches to the public health threats that are likely to come in the future and be better prepared than they were and we were from a COVID-19 perspective.
Thank you, Heather. So what I'm hearing from you is, though you see some initial movement, a lot more still needs to be done. There is obviously lack of trust, lack of resistance to change, and obviously there's fear. No thanks to movies like Terminator 2, where you have the entire AI running amok, which could be possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but definitely not happening right now. But a lot more needs to be done, and it remains to see that whether it'll be the regulations that will drive it, whether it'll be organizations that will drive it, or will it be even consumers. A lot of technological change has been driven by consumers. They demand better services, they demand better products, and we might have a disruptor who can come in and do the right things here. But then, talking of disruption, talking of fear, I've always been fascinated by this part. Satish and Dr. Carr talked about removing the doctor, but you can't remove the doctor because legally a doctor has to sign off on the prescription. Irrespective of whichever country you are in, you can't remove him. I mean, even if you have a dummy or a stamping authority as a doctor, you still need a doctor. But what about things like insurance agents? Like, why do I need an actuarian? Why do I need a health insurance company? And this question is more to Suresh in his new role, where he's looking at the confluence of providers and payers and even members. So Suresh, my question is, I can go to an AI, get a decision made, and then I can directly contract with Dr. Carr for my treatment. Why do I even need, intervention in the insurance industry? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So Vikram, this is as good as, you kind of preempted by saying, I can't remove doctors because that is one very popular, unwanted myth or fear being created. But it takes me back to my school days. I used to be in a lot of debates, and one of the popular topic at that point in time, the computers were just percolating into the schools. So, to create awareness, will computer take away your jobs, right? And that was a time when my dad has to wait for a scooter for 3 to 5 months, right? And even if I can afford, I can't get a car, right? And of course, I still remember, the roads were empty, pretty much empty. When cars go, kids run behind the car because it's not a commodity that you see. I'm not saying that like everybody should have a car or whatever, but if we see that those are all like convenience, and of course people getting like a family get together to watch a TV, right? So from there to today, if you look at if country like India has really progressed a lot around many indexes, I would attribute a lot of them to computers, right? And this is exactly what was feared 25 years back, when I was at school and people were saying, oh, no, will it take your jobs? What will happen to a country like India where there are, more people than anything that you can find on the earth and all kind of things, right? So what has happened? It has actually uplifted people, empowered people. You have choices to make. What was not even thinkable, many people in the society are able to think. So, in my opinion, I am an eternal optimist, Dr. Vikram. And what do I see is this is actually going to help, right? So let us look at, like this whole conundrum, right? What does the patient want? Patient wants a good care when he's at the critical moment, right? Interestingly, like look at the psychology, right? When I'm doing very good, I don't mind, throwing out on a lavish party. I don't mind throwing out on something very lavish. I don't really even mind about, like spending 50% more. When I'm in need, I really care about how much money I'm spending. Is the scan critical? I do more Google shopping when I'm in a critical need, like in healthcare need, than any other time. Unfortunately, that's how the psychology works today, right? So for a patient or a person who is actually in the need, he wants a real value for money at the time of the need, right? Now look at the doctor. Every doctor wants to actually provide the right care at the right time, and and they want to serve more. They want to serve more. They don't want to get stuck to one because they want to see more patients so that they can make a better impact. And look at the hospitals; it's the same, right? The more they serve, contrary to the typical belief that we have in the country, that they kept in the hospital for more days so that they can make money. And just using this local phrase which people typically say. Actually, when they keep you more time in the hospital is going to lose money, because the most critical resources are like places like your operation theaters and other places. If ICUs and wards are continuing to keep people for long, what happens is your most critical resource, most expensive resource per square feet, which is the operation theater, cannot function, because I can't operate if the ICU is full, right? And I can't move people out of the ICUs if the ward is full, right? So if you look at this whole thing, right, and come to the insurers, right, and again, for insurers, what they want, they do want to serve the people better, right? They want to be the best, where they want to give a very seamless experience, right? Where anybody joins my insurance, I would rather want to give such a seamless experience that they walk in and it is completely that's it. They show a card and that's it. They walk out, and rest of the things I want to completely automate, right? So today, does it happen that way? 10 years back, if I had 15 years back, when I went for my second kid, it took 8 hours for getting discharged, right? Primarily because the time the doctor said you're ready, get set, go 8 o'clock. By the time all the process got over, it was actually 6 o'clock. It was the most bearing moment for any parent, right? You're really happy to go home with your kid, etc., but you're stuck because the process is started done, right? For insurance companies and companies like Optum, which is actually enabling multiple insurers by digitizing their workflow, this is the dream come true. What we want to do is we actually want to make the entire thing frictionless, entire thing seamless, and that's the journey we are on to. And I'm actually very, very optimistic that if we democratize AI practice, if we democratize data, which is very, very important for coming out some of the breakthrough solutions, I think all our life is going to actually improve for better. Like the example that I talked about, like 20 years back, how the economy was to where it is today by embracing new, development that was happening.
So Suresh, what you're telling me is no matter how much we do advance on AI, we can't replace insurers.
I think depending, even how much ever we do, some of the role plays may not get completely replaced. The role plays, they will adapt to, do something much better, much higher, maybe in a different avatar, but, the role players will continue to be there. Like you have a provider, you will definitely have a payer, you will have a member, right? And you will have an orchestrator, right? So the role might, kindly get changed, but it will be all for better. And I'm sure, we at Optum are looking at that big time. If you go and look at some of the work that we are doing, it is all around that. Yes, Dr.
No, I'm totally in agreement with you, Suresh, because, there was one interesting statistical fact was when we had the horses running carriages, there used to be 17 people taking care of each carriage. That's the approximate calculation. Right, from your blacksmith to your veterinarian surgeon, people to clean the roads because the horses, as they go, they leave behind a lot of dung. And when the horses went away and the cars came in, all of them, the roads expanded and you could go further away. Almost all these people got absorbed into other industries like hospitality and road constructions, etc. And I think similarly, what I'm hearing from you is, as AI comes into insurance, you will see insurers working on more complex areas, similar to a lot of the people who moved from typewriters to computers and started doing much more complicated calculations. So it's very fascinating. Basically, what will happen is a bigger evolution in the way we deliver services in healthcare, and I kind of agree with you. Which brings me to the standards question, which almost everybody seems to come to. And Satish, you hit upon it very early in our discussion. So, what kind of evolution are you seeing in the standards and protocols as well, which will help take the to medical devices to the next level, which includes obviously a roadmap for AI. But what is that roadmap? And second part is, do you see any risks as we continue to evolve in this system, especially with the changing standards and the protocols?
Yeah, you see if you want to go massive scale on AI, right? The standard without standardization, it's going to be next to impossible. And for more than a decade now, if you see, the health systems have invested heavily in the digitization aspect, right? In every aspect of their operations. Now, some of those investments have probably given the returns, but not to a level of what we all would expect. That is actually because digitization alone is not enough. When the standardizing data across the systems is one of the main aspects of applying analytics and the gleaning insights, but what is preventing the disparate systems, especially exacerbated with the health industry consolidation, right? It has complicated the standardization effort. That's to answer the second question part, right? What is becoming a risk? Those health industry consolidation is actually complicating it. I remember in one of the papers published in the Journal of American Medical Informatics Association, some of the researchers actually took around 20 to 30 electronic health records, and they did this manual observations. They found close to 615 observation errors just with 20 EHRs, right? Imagine. And the data variations in the CDA, the clinical document architecture, which is actually a very important variation or a data that is used to share the patient information between the systems. Of course, this problem is actually not new, and standards do exist to reliably and normalize and exchange the clinical health information. Something like LOINC, right? The logical observation identifiers, names, and codes. That applies names and identifiers for more than close to 58,000 medical terms that might appear in EHR. Is one such standard. And then you also have a standard like SNOMED, right? The systematic nomenclature of medicine is used as a standard to encode the EHR data and capture primarily the clinical information part. And then I can probably give you a lot of standards, right? Like FIRE, then you have DICOM, and then you have HL7. There are different standards for different purposes that exist already, and it's evolving. The challenge, though, is none of these standards talk to each other, right? When you have this laboratory, you take this LOINC, right? It's primarily for laboratory standardization. You take the SNOMED, which is on the EHR standardization. Then you have DICOM for imaging standardization. But the critical challenge at AI to do big AI on scale is a combination of all these data. Earlier, like what I said, the longitudinal data, having an EHR data of a patient, a DICOM data for the same patient, and maybe the patient demographics from HL7, and all these data when combined together is what is going to give us a huge advantage for AI and machine learning, right? To come out with some really good differentiating factors. So if at all there is anything that should happen in the future, how these different standards talk to each other, provide a different way, provide a common way of identifying or talking those medical terms. And that's going to be one of the challenge and also as a risk I see, because I'm not sure if any of the vendors that exist in these industries are even thinking, or any of the global standard organizations are even talking about how these different aspects of different standardization will come together for AI to evolve. That's my view.
Agreed. I see I see what you're saying, because as a clinician, I'm not able to get the full picture, and manually I have to piece them together because I'm physically doing it. I'm looking at your X-ray, I'm looking at your MRI, I'm looking at the lab data, I'm looking at my observations, looking at your sensorium, etc., and I'm making a diagnosis. But for the system to be able to do it in an automated way, all of these have to talk to each other.
Absolutely.
And that's an excellent point. I think that is something that has been puzzling me, but the way you explained it was, I could relate to it. So I took the AI out, put myself in, now took me out and put the AI in, and I see the problem now.
The good part is, or I don't know whether should I say this as a good part, but the part is AI is actually playing a role even in mapping. For example, when a electronic health record is given, there are AI algorithms that exist today which maps these 58,000 odd terms that goes into the EHRs that into what the standard wants. So standardization itself is being driven through AI.
Correct. That's a very, very good point. So we have about 20-25 minutes left in the session.
Dr. Vikram, I wanted to make 2 points.
Sure.
Yeah, one is actually taking out what Suresh was talking about in terms of the importance of human in the AI, or as we call it, as human in the loop perspective, particularly when you are dealing with somebody who is in acute need of care. And this is from the experience that we have seen in digital health platforms across the world. And I'm talking about a work that we did last year with World Economic Forum in preparing a framework or guidelines for chatbots in health. And I had my colleagues from ADA, Babylon, Dialogue from Canada, and all of that. One of the important things that came out is that systems which have the human at the back end of the AI, they performed much better in seamlessly taking the patient's input and putting into perspective than people who just left it on the AI. And that is something something that we are learning every possible day. This whole aspect of human-machine interaction, that how would you go about in safely handing over the patient from human to machine and machine to human. And the more that you build these systems in seamless communication system between human, machine, human, the more would be better for your overall AI systems that you design and devise to put it into the perspective of patients and others. This is working in healthcare. I do not know whether it will work in insurance or finance and all of that. Probably it will, but the human in the loop is going to be very, very important as a perspective in healthcare. The second point that I wanted to talk about, and Satish was talking about the amazing power that we have data, and particularly huge amount of data which are otherwise siloed, and now we have all of the kind of privacy laws which maybe in many ways do not talk to others. The power of cloud computing in terms of homomorphic encryption, where you are able to compute even on encrypted data. And we did this Federated Learning when we actually did it for one of our AI model that we got validated in Netherlands, Maastricht University, right? Where we are able to now work on loads of data without even having them to come to Indian shores or Indian servers. And then also the other very interesting thing that is coming up is called differential privacy, which where patients during their own consent process would actually tell that with removing the PHI, you can use the rest of the data for research purposes to get perspectives on community health or build AI models, which will be important for disease outcome.
No, excellent points. I think it makes sense. The more I think about a system designed for somebody in need, and that is what the healthcare industry encounters day in and day out, then you need to have consciousness. And the machines, at least as of now, there is no way to prove that they will develop consciousness. Until we have consciousness, I think it's difficult to replace any human being, doctor or an insurance person. But that brings me to a very interesting topic, and I'll probably start with Heather on this, is on the ethical use of AI. And I start with you, Heather, because I know the European Union has given a set of recommendations. And though the UK probably will not be in the EU for too long, but you still have a guideline on the ethical use of AI. So, because artificial intelligence is incomplete without consciousness, and consciousness and all that data that comes along with it requires an ethical treatment of it. So, what are your perspectives on it, and how do you see that working out? And just one thing for the audience in the meantime, if there are questions that you want to put to the panel, we'll have about 10 minutes, so we can take about 2 or 3 questions, but please put them in the Q&A. We'll try to answer them if possible. Please, Heather, all yours.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of put together the ethics with the trust, I guess, aspects. Yeah, as you said earlier on, there are a lot of movies that I guess a lot of people were brought up on, and they have those in the back of the mind. And I think one of the other thing I was thinking of is during the pandemic, people were willing to talk to their doctor on telehealth. For the first time, we've been talking about it since 1970, and that was the first time that people trusted the doctor to be on a screen talking to them and have that healthcare. So I think, from my perspective, I think the pandemic, obviously, we wouldn't have wished it on humanity at all. But I think it has fast-forwarded a number of things. So people do think, and I'm probably talking more about in the UK here, people are more trusting now to do things. So I use the example of the AI assistants, to use those to get triaged to the doctor or to the hospital. And so for me, that ethics, that trust is now about building on what we had during the pandemic, what we learned during the pandemic. And, I should say, I know the pandemic isn't over, but I think we need to be grabbing on to the good things that we learnt, and building those into everybody's consciousness, and whether that be ethics, whether that be trust, whether that be having a hybrid health system, and being willing to think about whether if your doctor's coming to you through a virtual assistant or through your video, that you'll be getting the same level of service, ethics, that you would if you're seeing them face to face. So that I guess for me that is, I put ethics, trust, and really building on the learnings from the pandemic quickly, whilst people have still got those in the back of their mind.
Sure, Heather, great point. Suresh, any perspectives on ethics, on ethical use of AI that you might be seeing as a model both in the medtech industry as well as in health insurance?
Yeah, I think the major players, right, they should actually come together, which is actually happening in the pharma industry, and create the trusted network, right? First, start where boil the ocean one at a time, right? You can't completely boil the entire thing, right? So the biggest challenge we have is the trust issue, and there is if everybody starts going to the higher plane, get more educated, if they hire better technologists, they will soon understand that the whole trust issue can be managed with the right usage of technology. And one of the first steps will be create a trusted network, right? So the trusted network can actually happen between, right now it is being driven by governments. Actually, the UK has its own network. France has announced a network where they are getting together multiple institutions, because it is all, like government-run institutions, so they are able to do that. But it is possible even in countries like India, which is, like having much more plethora of, data at the private institutions, where even private institutions actually can come together, form trusted network. If pharma companies, which has such a longer life cycle time, so much investment getting into it, can trust each other and get together to accelerate, what they are doing, I'm sure even the equipment companies, equipment manufacturers, and hospitals can at least start creating some trusted network. This way, what can actually happen is you completely eliminate bias because you have variety of data, and that actually automatically builds fairness into the system, right? So I think technology can only go to a certain extent, right? I think the human element of forming trust, creating the right initiative to form the trusted network to the better benefit of the ultimate beneficiary, which is the individuals like all of us, right? Will happen by creating such trusted network, especially in the healthcare area.
Excellent, Suresh. So again, it's back to creating an ecosystem where you trust each other and ensure that you use the data in an ethical way, and obviously train the system. Because the system is like an innocent child, right? System will train on whatever you train it on. So Satish, then over to you. I mean, you are the ones with the most amount of data from a clinical aspect. So how do you see the ethics angle playing itself out in the use of AI?
There are quite a lot of already, at least in the developed nations, that has come related to how the data itself is being shared or utilized to train the models, one within their own countries, or how the data can go beyond their countries. You get into these challenges of, there's also risk for accelerating AI, right? These challenges like the GDPRs and other things that all comes into picture. So it is a chicken and egg situation. While we want AI to accelerate, then there are ethics that is very, very important from a patient point of view, and the data sharing point of view, safety, all these aspects comes into picture. But if you, being a technologist, if you see where I see ethics also playing a role is when the data, because if you see almost all algorithms today that AI or FDA agrees is all supervised learning algorithms, right? These are not, it's very, very less number of work has happened on the unsupervised learning. A large amount of work has happened with the supervised learning. And the supervised learning means you basically have a standard set of data, and then you train the model, and you expect that model to now give you results based on the supervised learning. What if the data that we use to train that model represents only a certain community or a certain segment of you call people or pathological information? All those becomes also, so there is an ethics coming right in during the training model itself. Not sure if anybody has thought through how ethics would play a role even before AI comes into picture.
Understood. So what I'm hearing from you is that though it was an integral part of the ecosystem, but now with the fact that this may be having a higher purpose, the data especially, it becomes even more to have started putting the systemic thinking and those guardrails in place, which is what the EU has done and which is what I think most countries will follow. I mean, if you look at the GDPR as an example, then this is exactly what happened. Excellent. Dr. Kar, any final words on ethical use of data, because you are the expert on it and you are actually in the real hot seat because you have clinical data.
Well, you know, when we were deliberating on different ethical aspects, particularly from the one is, of course, the use of ethics in clinical medicine versus use of ethics in AI, and bring them together to do this. There are 15, 16 top bullet points to actually look at. But my favorite one is actually the bias. And bias is something which is, something which develops at, as Satish was talking about, at the term when you are developing something, a model. It also can happen when you are deploying the model. And it also can happen, the bias can happen when you are using the model, when the model is being used by a clinician on the ground. And just to give you an example of a bias which comes from, say, temporal perspective or geographical perspective or ethnic perspective at times, where you begin to exclude populations out in your model. And we had a very clear example for a dermatology app, which was built and had again a wonderful precision recall when they looked at it on people who have much fairer skin. But when they started looking at this on people with a little bit of more colored skin, it was, the accuracy fell, and there were no more a viable option for that to be used. And when it went and saw what is the kind of the data you used in building the model, we found out that they excluded the population to actually get that kind of a result. That is the bias when you are developing a model. The bias which you are actually looking at it when you are deploying it is that you say from the very beginning, hey, look, we are not going to use this in XYZ population. And that is where if you're looking at, say, you want to build a product for, say, identifying diabetes, and if you say, I am not in the business of putting in people who are having gestational diabetes, you are looking at a huge amount of population, of women who are hyperglycemic at the time when they are pregnant. These are ethical considerations that you have to look at when you are building or deploying models. And then the doctor goes and says, you have a wonderful model, and you say, hey, look, I'm not going to use this, even if I know the accuracy of the model is 95%. I'm not going to use this for the histopathology diagnosis, or I'm not going to use this as a chest X-ray and all of that. I will wait and I will see all of those. So how do we go about in addressing those at every nook and corner of clinical system to actually get the best of the AI to come into our daily workflow and we leverage it to maximum?
Understood. I think it's a very serious question, and I agree with you on the bias, because the bias can really skew your results. On that note, let me take a few questions. There have been a few questions that have come up. One is from Dr. Kamala Rai, where she asks, if reports are to be believed by 2030, 500 billion interconnected. Okay, how did that happen? Okay, never mind. How will it change the practice of patient care? I'm assuming, Dr. Kar, that question is for you.
Well, of course, it's going to change in many ways. It has changed in many ways. So we work very closely with companies who actually provide the back-end solution for Fitbit. And they have a lot of algorithms which now talk about, the power of the connected device in identifying early warning signs for critical illnesses which can happen. They also look at adherence, medication adherence, which has been necessarily, Heather will understand what I'm talking about, particularly from a clinical research perspective, where you have always a struggle whether the patient is actually taking the medication or not. So adherence is something which is very, very, absolutely very important in that. And the third thing is something which I'm very passionate about, particularly people who have problems related to their mobility. People who have Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, who are not able to do their activity of daily living, coming out of their beds or their chairs whole of the day. There are now devices that can actually track them throughout the day and pinpoint when do they require appropriate therapeutic intervention to actually do the activity of daily living by themselves. And that is showing transient shift in the way we care and the way we look at. And by 2030, we can assume that some of these diseases would be now addressed properly because we have appropriate tracking and intervention.
Excellent. I think people forget. Like one of the things that hits me when I talk to you and hearing your points on AI is healthcare is essentially a system which caters to people in need. And there are people who can express that need, and there are people who can't because they're not being able to diagnose what is wrong with them. And AI can really help us do that. But at the same time, obviously, with the sensors coming in, that gives us more data, which forms a cornerstone. Excellent point. I really love the thought process. The second question is from Sahil Jain, who said, okay, you talked a lot about AI adoption by doctors or healthcare systems. What about AI adoption by the patients? How do you respond to the fact that AI is assisting their treatment? Well, I think Satish, maybe AI is already assisting a lot of treatments, but what if patients are aware now AI is assisting their treatment? Now what? What do you think is the reaction?
I mean, if I'm in their shoes first, then it was going to be a surprise to me, definitely, because the common layman who is there walking around the earth probably wouldn't even have heard many of them what AI means, right? And if they're going to hear that some machine has actually helped in assisting whatever they are going through, one is going to be a big surprise in their face. But if you ask me about the acceptance, if there is enough learning and communication around, even during the process of the treatment or patient care, the acceptance may go up. The initial years, I definitely see acceptance being a question mark from the patient's angle, unless and until they are educated section of people, right? So, as I said, if you take India's population, how many of us or how many of our own folks would know how AI is actually helping in the patient care? Hardly anybody does, right? Yeah. So my view is, yes, acceptance initially is going to be a challenge. And there has to be a lot of work that needs to be done, both from the government and also the regulatory bodies and the private companies, and how we communicate to those patients.
Excellent, Satish. One more interesting question has come, which says that are doctors and hospitals willing to share patient data in developing AI program in healthcare? Suresh, you want to answer that? I mean, I know there are conditions and there are limitations, but anything based on your experience?
I think that's the the moment data became oil and everybody started protecting oil. That's a true reality. Slight changes are happening based on government intervention, but the COVID actually has accelerated a different thinking. It has in fact accelerated two kind of different thinking, which was otherwise holding us a lot just 2 years back. Telemedicine was, was even, like some countries were even looking at, should we even stop this teleconsultancy and all that, right? Some countries, without naming which country, they were even thinking of should we ban this, and all kind of things changed overnight when pandemic came in, where people realized that how critical this is, right? So that has actually enabled different set of data actually flowing into the system, right? So although number one, number two, the pharma companies, the way they collaborated to accelerate delivery of the vaccines actually also made them start thinking how beneficial it will be if they start leveraging data from each other. Now, many hospitals also realized that, there is enough to learn by sharing information. It actually happened in UK where the Oxfords and others were getting together to start sharing the COVID-related data so that they can do some federated learning on top of it to be able to predict COVID using X-ray and things like that, right? The same happened in our country as well, with ISC collaborating with certain institutions. I think the pandemic have actually questioned, the reason why the benefit overweighs all other things, right? The benefit overweighs all other things, and people are opening up. However, as I said, embrace the right technology to ensure that the other concerns like privacy, bias, security, all those things are taken care, and do more and more sharing. I think the benefit for the community completely overweighs by sharing this and going in this right direction. And people need not worry about competing with each other at all, because there are again technologies, and everybody is having their pie in this bigger cake, right? So there is enough to share and enough to learn and get back in order to be able to provide a better service to the community.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent thought, Suresh. I think there is, at the end of the day, the one theme that's coming through this is healthcare is a sector for people in need. So service is a very important part of it. One very interesting question. Hey, thank you, Ajit. Good to see your comment. One interesting question that has come is on the golden hour and emergency protocols. So, Dr. Kar, maybe we'll take this as the last question. I know we are already out of time. But any impact you can see of AI in the golden hour and emergency protocols?
Oh, that's a lovely question. And that is something which keeps us awake at the night, because of the fact that, whenever you have something which is a conversational AI or build something like that, what happened if you are seeing somebody in a higher ranges of triage where somebody needs to go and immediately get an access in terms of an ER, emergency room and all of that. Well, two things that comes to my mind immediately. One is, how do you build in those protocols in your conversational AI where you take in the best of the triage criteria and input it into your system so that you could figure out those people who are at urgent needs and quickly direct them to the ER or any emergency services that they can get. The second thing is also about understanding the needs from the analysis of your data and putting appropriate operational backbone or clinical operational backbone to suit those needs at different positions. That is something maybe for our next conversation we can keep, but it is a very, very interesting point.
Excellent question. I really loved it, and good response, Dr. Kar. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for taking time out from your busy schedules. I think AI will become part of our lives. It will not be the shiny pointed object that it's meant out to be. And as part of healthcare, whether it's hospitals, it's pharma, devices, insurance, I think healthcare AI will become so mainstream that we will not have panel discussions on AI because it will be so ubiquitous, it will be everywhere, omnipotent, omnipresent. And I think I agree with a lot of what you said. Healthcare is a sector in need. It looks at people in need and they need care. And if AI helps them get that care to return to their functional lives faster, higher, better, that is the direction the industry will take. Right. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and hand it back to Suman for his closing comments.
Thank you, Dr. Vikram. Thank you, panelists. I think it was a really insightful, great, and brilliant session. And so it should be when you're discussing something as important as AI and healthcare both. Uh, I mean, you could see some great comments from people in the audience. You could see some great questions being asked, and even greater answers by each one of you, which are very, very prompt to the point. Uh, I feel these kind of discussions should be ongoing because there is a long roadmap which is set for us to integrate these kind of technologies with core systems like healthcare in India to make primary healthcare systems or secondary healthcare systems robust and significant. So we will keep on having these discussions, but more about practical applications, like Dr. Vikram said, because that is what we are all about. We are talking about future technologies, but we are focusing on applications of these technologies which will make our lives better. Being a Friday, I would want to wish you all a great weekend, and I would want to thank you all again for joining us today, and thank you to the Future Tech Panel working group members of the healthcare group for making this session possible. And there are certain things, though, which doesn't need much of AI, but a little more of common sense. That is to, maintain safe distances, wear masks, wash your hands, get vaccinated, stay safe because the pandemic is still there and it's not over yet. But until then, I would want to wish you all the very best and wish you a very great health. And I will see you again soon after a couple of weeks with another new session on the same platform and at the same time and same place. So until then, take care, everybody. Thank you so much and join us again. Have a great weekend. Bye. Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.